The first thing people remembered about that night wasn't the music or the white roses or the shimmering chandeliers. It was the moment the bride pointed across the rehearsal dinner and said, loudly enough for every table to hear, "Security! Remove that woman now." The words did not simply travel. They ripped through the air, sharp, humiliating, impossible to take back. Dozens of heads turned. Forks froze midair. Glasses hovered inches from lips. At the far end of the room stood an older black woman in a simple navy blue dress. Nothing flashy, nothing designer, nothing that screamed wealth or status like everyone else in the ballroom. She looked painfully out of place. But she also stood with a calmness that made her seem grounded, as if chaos ricocheted around her but never touched her. The bride, Victoria Hale, in her pearl-encrusted gown and diamond tennis bracelet, marched forward like a general storming enemy lines. "Who let her in?" Victoria demanded, her voice slicing through the stunned silence. "This is a private event for family only." The woman didn't flinch. Not when the guests murmured. Not even as two uniformed security guards approached her. Only her eyes moved, slowly, deliberately, toward Victoria. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said softly. Her voice carried the strength of someone who had weathered storms and survived them all. "I was told to come." "Told by who?" Victoria snapped. "Because it certainly wasn't me." From across the room, the groom, Michael Bradford, went pale. He pushed his chair back so abruptly it scraped across the marble floor. "Victoria, wait," he began, but his fiancée cut him off, holding up a manicured hand. "No, Michael. Not tonight. Not before our wedding. I refuse to have some—" she looked the older woman up and down with open disdain. "Some stranger wander in here looking for a free meal." A ripple of laughter came from a table of bridesmaids, their tones syrupy with cruelty. "She must be someone's +1 gone rogue. Maybe she's with catering? Look at her dress. God, does she not own a mirror?" The remarks landed like stones thrown into a quiet lake, each one creating concentric waves of humiliation. Still, the woman stood unbroken. Michael reached them just as Victoria's voice cut again through the room. "I don't care why she's here. Someone escort this charity case, out of my rehearsal dinner." The older woman closed her eyes for a split second. Across the room, guests exchanged looks. Some are uncomfortable. Some are curious. Some were entertained. The Hales were wealthy, old money wealthy, and the rehearsal dinner reflected it. Crystal chandeliers. Imported linens. Centerpieces that cost more than a month's rent in most cities. This woman clearly did not belong to their world. And Victoria relished reminding her of it. Michael stepped between them, breath unsteady. "Victoria, stop. She's not a stranger." "Oh." Victoria crossed her arms, seizing the moment. "Then please, Michael, enlighten me. Who exactly is she?" Michael swallowed. She's important to me." Victoria blinked as if he'd spoken in code. "Important how?" Her voice was brittle ice. Michael didn't answer. Not fast enough. And that was all the permission Victoria needed. Her voice turned vicious. "You're telling me this woman in a bargain rack dress, should be here? Should stand among our friends, our family, our people?" The older woman's spine straightened. Her hands folded gently in front of her, the gesture almost regal. Michael opened his mouth again, but Victoria cut him off sharply. "No. I don't accept it. Security, remove her now." The guards shifted uncomfortably. They looked at the woman, then at Michael, then at each other. "Ma'am," one said quietly, "please come with us." "I understand," the woman replied. Her voice was steady, calm, heartbreakingly composed. She looked Michael in the eye, really looked, and something flickered across her face. Disappointment, sadness, and something else, older, deeper. She turned toward the exit. But before she took more than 3 steps, the first Rehearsal crack appeared. A small boy, Victoria's nephew, peeked out from behind a chair and asked loudly, "Mommy, why are they kicking Grandma out?" The room froze. Victoria spun around, cheeks flaming. "She's not anyone's grandmother. Don't be ridiculous." But the words didn't matter, because the room erupted into a hushed panic. Grandma? Did he say grandma? What does that mean? Michael squeezed his eyes shut. Victoria stared at him, betrayal creeping over her face. Michael? Explain. He tried. He really did. But everything he said sounded too small, too late, too tangled. She's not my biological mother, he finally managed. But she raised me. Since I was 9. Victoria blinked in utmost shock. Then asked, raised you how? Michael's throat tightened. She's the woman who adopted me. Gasps rippled like wind through wheat. A bridesmaid dropped her champagne flute. The older woman, standing only steps from the door, paused but didn't turn around. Victoria's disbelief turned venomous. You're telling me, she hissed, the woman I just asked to leave is your mother? She's my mom, Michael whispered. Now the older woman finally turned. Her eyes met Victoria's. And for the first time all night, her expression hardened. There was no anger, no pride, only truth. A truth that hit harder than any scream could. Michael's voice cracked. She's the reason I became the man I am. The reason I survived what happened to me. She's my family. Victoria's mouth fell open. Her face was drained of color. The room teetered on the edge of chaos. But what happened next pushed it over. An elderly man stood from the back table. A man no one had noticed earlier, wearing a suit slightly outdated but immaculately pressed. His voice trembled, not from fear, but respect. Forgive me, he called out, but if that woman is who I think she is... He stepped forward slowly. Then every single one of you has made a very grave mistake. Whispers resumed at lightning speed. Who is she? Why does he look scared? What's going on? Victoria forced a laugh, brittle and desperate. Oh please. She's just some social worker or charity organizer. Michael has a big heart, he takes in strays, we all know this. But the man shook his head. No, she is not a social worker. Not a charity case. And certainly not someone you should ever disrespect. He looked around the room. I served in the federal courthouse for 22 years. And unless my eyes deceive me, he nodded toward the woman. That is former federal court officer Lorraine Washington. The silence was thunderous. Someone choked on their drink. A bridesmaid dropped into her chair. Michael lowered his head. Victoria went still, completely still, like a statue carved in shock. The older woman, Lorraine Washington, finally spoke. And her words were soft enough to break the room in half. I didn't come here tonight to cause conflict, she said. I came because my son asked me to. Her eyes flicked to Michael, then back to the bride. But I see now that some people only recognize value when it comes wrapped in wealth. Her gaze swept across the room, a quiet, devastating verdict. And others, she added, judge worth by appearance alone. Victorina inhaled sharply. But Lorraine wasn't done. Tomorrow, she said gently, you will celebrate a marriage that is being paid for by a trust fund. She stepped closer, each word a controlled blow. A trust fund I oversee. Guess. Whispers. A scream muffled behind a napkin. Victoria swayed as if the floor had tilted beneath her feet. Lorraine looked directly at her. And after tonight, there is much to reconsider. Then she walked out, leaving behind a room full of people who had no idea what kind of storm they had just unleashed. For a long, perfect heartbeat after Lorraine Washington left, the rehearsal dinner existed as if suspended in amber. The chandeliers continued to glitter, dessert spoons rested on saucers, and the string quartet played a note that no one quite heard. Conversations stuttered and then splintered into fragmented questions that never became sentences. Victoria stared at the empty space where Lorraine had stood, as if the woman's absence had left a physical hollow that could be measured. Her fingers dug into her napkin until the fabric creased. Pride, she realized with a sudden, savage clarity, was quieter at its core than she had believed. Humiliation, on the other hand, screamed. Michael, she said, but the name came out small, a rope that frayed by the time it reached him. He stood frozen, palms pressed flat against the tablecloth, as if anchoring himself to the familiar. Around him, relatives shifted. The room's social topography, who smiled, who looked away, who chose sides, was remapping itself in the space of a single, devastating sentence. She oversees the trust fund that finances this wedding. The words circulated like an oil spill, slick and sinking. At the back of the room, Thomas, the groundskeeper Michael had mentioned in halting tones, had not sat at the family's table. He had come in from outside, coat still dusted with the yard's damp, and now stood with his hands folded, watching, his face a map of loyalties and regret. He had known Lorraine longer than most in the Hall knew grants and gowns. He had watched her bring Michael to soccer practice when his shoes were taped together. He had watched her sit through school plays while other parents skipped them for cocktail parties. He had known the boy she raised from a child clutching a patched backpack to the man who now stood in a suit that cost more than his yearly wages. A bridesmaid whispered to her neighbor, "Is this a joke? Is this staged?" But her laugh broke like brittle ice. The attorney, Richard Petton, summoned at the first sign of drama, was already on the phone. He had a practiced face for crisis, the furrowed brow, the emptying eyes that meant work. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on Lorraine's abandoned chair, then flicking to Michael, who met his lawyer's eyes and gave a minute, impossible nod. Petton's voice slid low and precise into the receiver, "Find me every trust document for the Bradford estate." That single instruction began the unspooling. Michael did not go to Petton. He moved toward the exit, toward the door through which Lorraine had left, his mouth set like someone bearing a bruise. "Mom," he said as he caught up with her on the marble steps, please come back." Lorraine slowed but did not turn. Her profile was a study in exhaustion and resolve. She had walked into this room expecting, as she had told Thomas, to keep a quiet seat at the edge and watch a boy she loved climb a stage of his life. She had not come for triumph or to humiliate, and yet humiliation had been delivered to her like a tray of cold champagne. "Michael," she said at last. Her voice softened. It did not plead. It weighed. "I will come back when you are ready to tell the truth." He reached for her hand and did not find it wanting. He stepped forward, closing the distance, sweat pricking at the back of his neck. "They don't understand. They think. They don't even try to," Lorraine said. "You ask them not to know, and they choose ignorance when it is easier than gratitude." He looked at her, and inside that look was a child reaching for reassurance. "They laughed at you. They always will if you let them," Lorraine replied. "But pride is not a thing I ever cultivated to keep myself safe. Love is." She paused. "Tell them why I was here." He swallowed audibly, and then the words poured out. A halting confession that had the force of confession because it was true and because it could not be retracted. He told them about the foster homes, the nights in a room with peeling wallpaper, the teacher who had refused to look away. He told them about a woman who had come to a public housing block with a steady hand and paperwork and patience, so quiet it slipped beneath the radar of anyone looking for something flashy. He told them about a signed piece of paper, an adoption decree they had never been invited to see, a small legal anchor in a turbulent life. Back in the hall, murmur grew into a low, nervous swell. Some faces showed curiosity sharpened into discomfort. Others showed the animal reflex of those who feel threatened when the scaffolding of their assumptions wobbles. Victoria's face underwent a slow, terrifying contraction. She had built an identity that required certain truths to remain unchallenged. Her status, the natural order of things, the unspoken social contract that put her on the higher rung by default. To see that scaffolding questioned was worse than any personal slight. It was a structural threat. The first to break was Margaret, Victoria's closest confidant. She had loved the story of her own social superiority with the tenacity of a believer. Now that story felt suddenly precarious. "Michael," she said, outraged more for the shock to her worldview than any loyalty to him, "did you know? Did you know she would be here?" "Not like this," he said. "No." "Then why didn't you tell us?" Margaret demanded. The request was a thin disguise for accusation. Michael's jaw tightened. "Because what mattered was his day, not my history," he replied, and the pronouns tangled. The smallness of what he tried to say and the enormity of what he meant got lost between them. Thomas stepped forward then, his voice steady as an axe. "We have looked after Master Michael since he was a boy," he said. The old words, "Master," hung in the air like a relic. "We've always known where his loyalties were. Mrs. Washington saved him from worse than the cold. She's kept this place running, paid the taxes when there were problems, and more than once she kept a check on his schooling when money was short." One by one, small voices rose in corroboration. The butler who'd been discreet and faithful, the kitchen manager who remembered Lorraine's visits with folding boxes of casseroles, even the head groundskeeper who hovered now, hat in hand. Evidence marshaled itself quietly, like a slow-moving train. Receipts, a photograph of Lorraine with a young Michael at a community center, a pay stub showing a direct deposit from a trust labeled Bradford Washington Legacy Fund. When Peton came back into the room, his expression had shifted from procedural concern to professional alarm. "If these records are correct," he muttered to Michael, "we need to consider the legal shape of this estate. There may be protections here you weren't aware of. And Mrs. Washington, if she has oversight of any trust, then we have to proceed carefully." Victoria moved like a wound. "Protections?" she echoed, incredulous. "How is this? What is going on?" It was the precise moment the photographer, who had been hovering at the edge like a spinner whose job was to capture candids for the family album, approached with a memory card clutched in his hand and a face suddenly pale. I recorded everything," he stammered. "The confrontation, the way they treated her. And then she left. But I kept filming." Silence descended again, but a different kind, a charged one, like a theater before the curtain rises. The power in the room redistributed itself in microshifts, glances were recalibrated, alliances reconsidered. The people who had laughed now felt watched by history. The people who had been quiet felt vindicated. It was not a clean moment. People scrambled, to their phones, to their whispers, to their narratives. Some reached for the old story they had told themselves about belonging. Others felt the uncomfortable tug of shame. Michael stood between them all, a bridge that trembled. "I am so sorry," he said, to no single person and to everyone at once. "I should have told you sooner. She is my mother. She raised me. My life, her choices, saved me." Victoria's lips formed a sarcastic arc. "Saved you?" she said. "By what? Adopting you and then disappearing during cocktail hour?" A laugh, short and vicious, bubbled up from one of the tables, a sound that made Lorraine flinch despite her absence. Then Lorraine returned. The marble steps were cool under her shoes. She did not march in with the entitlement of reclaiming anything. She walked in like a judge calling the court to order, quiet, unhurried, inexorable. She looked at Victoria with a softness that contained a hurricane. "You will apologize to the staff you humiliated," she told her. "To the boy who asked about his grandmother. And to the people who kept quiet because they were afraid." Victoria's color shifted again. Humiliation sharpened into fury, but the room had shifted with Lorraine's return. The staff looked at one another like survivors recognizing the face of the person who had always noticed them. The butler's throat bobbed, the groundskeeper's jaw clenched. They began, in slow, careful voices, to tell stories. Small repairs done without fanfare, salaries paid from an account no one had the right to ask about, nights when Lorraine had kept the lights on at the school library and stayed until dawn. The narrative tiled together, image by image, until the veneer of a single family's harmless life looked patched with contradictions. Outside, beyond the ballroom windows, the moon had risen. Inside, conversation became evidence, and evidence began to point not toward a single villain but toward a tangled history of assumptions, negligence, and quiet stewardship. And when the first guest, the one who had laughed the loudest, finally looked Lorraine in the eye and whispered, "I'm sorry," it was not the hollow apology of social obligation. It had the weight of a person whose bones had been shifted by truth. But apologies do not erase years. They do not undo the private humiliations nor the quiet denials that allowed them. As Victoria's defenses crumbled, as guests began to murmur about trustees, deeds, and duty, an older, sterner question loomed. What was Michael prepared to do now that his life had been revealed not as the tidy story they had all assumed but as the complicated, costly truth that had been hidden to protect him? Lorraine's hand rested on Michael's shoulder, a small, fierce anchor. Tonight, she said, softly, we decide whether to build on grace or keep building on pretense. The room held its breath, and outside, the thin March wind pressed against the glass, as if the world itself leaned in to hear their answer. For several long seconds, the ballroom held its breath as if the walls themselves were listening. The polished floors reflected the chandelier light, the roses in crystal vases stood perfectly still, yet every person in the room felt the ground beneath them subtly shift, like gravity itself was being rewritten. Michael felt it most. A weight pressed against his ribs, a weight that came from 20 years of silence collapsing at once. His mother, his real mother, the only one who had ever earned the title, stood beside him with the quiet strength of someone who knew truth did not require volume to transform a room. Victoria watched Lorraine with the hollow-eyed disbelief of someone who'd walked confidently into a fight she assumed she'd already won, only to realize she never understood the opponent. No one rushed to help her. Not after what had been revealed. The air felt thick with the scent of shame. Lorraine's calm voice cut through it all like a polished gavel. Before this night goes any further, she said, there are things everyone here deserves to understand, especially you, Victoria. Her tone was gentle, but it carried the force of someone who had spent a lifetime holding people accountable without ever raising her voice. Victoria's jaw clenched. I don't need a lecture from the woman who raised your future husband? Lorraine finished. Victoria stopped speaking. Completely. Even the string quartet, suddenly aware of the emotional temperature in the room, lowered their bows and placed them silently on their laps. Lorraine stepped forward. If I am to be part of Michael's life, her voice steady, then you deserve to know who I am. And he deserves to stop hiding the story that shaped him. Michael's stomach twisted. He'd kept that story locked away for decades, not because he was ashamed of Lorraine, but because he feared people would misunderstand the trauma that came before her. But now, watching her, steady, dignified, unshaken, he realized the truth wasn't a weakness. The truth was powerful. And tonight, it demanded to be spoken. Lorraine's eyes moved from guest to guest. When I met Michael, she said quietly, he was 9 years old. He had been in the foster system for 2 years after losing both parents in a car accident. Gasps drifted through the room. Victoria's hands trembled. She had never asked about Michael's past. Not once. Weeks before his adoption was finalized, Lorraine continued, his caseworker told me he still left one part of his closet empty. When I asked him why, he said, she looked at Michael. Her eyes softened with memory. In case my real mom comes back. Michael's throat closed. He remembered that moment, how his voice had trembled, how he had expected her to scold him, how he had expected disappointment. Instead, Lorraine had knelt down, looked him in the eyes, and said, I'm not here to replace anyone. I'm here to be whatever you need. Now, in this glittering ballroom full of crystal wine glasses and expensive linen, Lorraine repeated the words. And that is still true. Victoria's composure fractured, splintering like glass under pressure. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered to Michael, her voice a brittle thread. Michael swallowed hard. Because you never asked. Because you were too busy telling me who I should be. Because you were too busy showing the world who you thought you were. But he did not say it aloud. Lorraine continued, her voice low, measured. In the years that followed, Michael worked harder than any child I've ever seen. He held on to honor, resilience, kindness, traits no one taught him, traits he carried despite what the world took from him. Now her eyes hardened, not with anger, but with truth sharpened into something unignorable. And then tonight, I watched a room full of adults try to take something from him again. Guests glanced away, unable to hold her gaze. The shame in the room deepened. Humiliation, she continued, is a tool used by people who mistake volume for power. Her eyes landed on Victoria. And tonight, Victoria, you wielded that tool with enthusiasm. Victoria's chin snapped up, but she didn't speak. Lorraine added, but power, real power, isn't loud. It doesn't draw attention to itself. It doesn't degrade others to feel tall. She let that sink in before quietly finishing. Real power is service, protection, responsibility, all of which you showed none of. A murmur moved like a ghost across the room. A bridesmaid wiped tears she didn't fully understand. The caterer swallowed hard. Even Peton, standing stiffly near the wall, lowered his head in respect. Michael's eyes filled. "Mom," he whispered, barely audible. "Say the rest," she said softly. He knew exactly what she meant. He turned to the crowd, to Victoria, to the family whose approval he had once tried desperately to earn. "I didn't tell anyone about my past," Michael said, voice thick, "because I wanted to build something new. A future that wasn't shaped by what I lost, but what I gained." His voice cracked. "And what I gained was her." Lorraine blinked, emotion shimmering unspoken at the corners of her eyes. Michael continued. "She put every bit of her savings into sending me to a better school. She took extra jobs so I could stay in sports. She stayed up every night during exam season just to quiz me with flashcards. She taught me right from wrong. She taught me that character mattered more than money or reputation." His shoulders trembled. "And she built a trust fund, not to control me, not to flaunt wealth, but to make sure I had the chance at a future I could be proud of." A gasp surged through the guests. Many of them had assumed the trust fund was an inheritance from some old money relative. They'd never imagined it was the result of sacrifice instead of privilege. But Michael wasn't finished. "The trust fund that is paying for this wedding," he inhaled shakily, "isn't from my biological family at all." He looked at Lorraine. "It's from her. From years of her saving, investing, scraping together everything she could." This time, the shock was not dramatic, it was reverent. Victoria swayed where she stood. Her voice barely emerged. "You mean everything, the venue, the catering, the guest hotel rooms?" Michael nodded slowly. "All of it." She staggered back as if struck. Reality hit her like a collapsing ceiling. Because in her attempt to protect her image, she had publicly degraded the only woman who made this wedding possible. Across the room, a woman in her 40s, Victoria's cousin, whispered, "Oh my God, she insulted the wrong person." A groomsman added quietly, "She insulted the only person who made this whole night even happen." And another voice, a distant aunt, tears slipping down her cheeks, said, "She insulted the woman who raised her future husband. The woman she should have honored." The words hit like slow, devastating blows. Victoria had never been humbled publicly, never been corrected with witnesses, never faced truth without an escape route. Her voice finally cracked. I didn't know. I didn't understand." Lorraine's response was calm, merciful but firm. "You didn't want to understand." Victoria's throat tightened. "How can you say that?" "Because when I walked in," Lorraine said, "you had two choices, treat me with kindness or treat me with contempt." Her eyes softened. "And you chose with confidence." A tremor rippled across Victoria's lips. The truth of it hurt more than any accusation. Then Lorraine turned to the guests. "I didn't come here tonight to embarrass anyone. I came for my son. Because he asked me to. Because I love him." Her voice deepened with quiet authority. "And because I wanted to support the woman he chose." Victoria flinched, not because of the words, but because of what came next. But support requires respect. Partnership requires humility. And marriage requires character. A hush traveled through the room. Every couple felt the truth in their bones. Every single person imagined being judged by such simple, devastating criteria. Finally, Lorraine looked at Victoria. "When I walked in tonight, I wasn't expecting praise. I wasn't expecting attention. I was expecting the bare minimum, human decency." The room held the silence gently, like a fragile thing. "And you failed that test." Tears finally pooled in Victoria's eyes. And Lorraine, who was not cruel and never had been, added quietly, "But failure is not final. Growth is a choice." Victoria's chest rose with a shudder. "Mrs. Washington," she whispered, voice shaking beyond control, "I'm sorry." It was the first honest thing she'd said all evening. Lorraine nodded once, acknowledging the apology without easing its weight. "There is more truth to come," Lorraine said softly, "and more choices to make." For a long time after Victoria's apology, The ballroom carried the quiet tension of a courtroom waiting for the verdict. Not a single fork tapped porcelain, not a single whisper rose above the breath people held. It was a silence thick with reckoning. Lorraine stood at the center of it, not as the humiliated outsider they once mistook her to be, but as something far greater. A mirror reflecting everyone's character back to them. Michael stood beside her like a man seeing his mother for the very first time. Every memory of her hand steadying him, first day of school, first heartbreak, first college rejection, echoed inside him with new clarity. Victoria looked shattered. And not because she'd been exposed, but because she finally saw herself clearly. That clarity hurt. Her voice shook as she turned toward Michael. I didn't know how much she meant to you. I didn't know. That's the problem, he said softly. You didn't want to know. Those words struck deeper than anger ever could. Victoria's shoulders pulled inward, pride folding in on itself. For the first time all night, the facade cracked enough to reveal the frightened girl beneath the diamonds and posture. Michael, her breath trembled. I'm sorry. Truly. I didn't see her. I didn't see you. I cared more about how everything looked than how anyone felt. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. I thought protecting our image meant protecting us. Michael shook his head. Love doesn't need protecting, he said quietly. People do. Victoria pressed her palm to her lips. A strangled sound escaped her, remorse. The guests watched riveted, not out of voyeurism, but because something raw and human was unfolding. A wealthy family, stripped of pretense. A bride confronting the version of herself she never admitted existed. A groom learning what it means to stand beside, or apart from, the person he chose. Lorraine stepped forward then, her presence transforming the space into something sacred. Victoria, she said gently, look at me. Victoria did, eyes swollen, pride evaporated. You hurt me tonight, Lorraine said. But I am not here to punish you. Victoria blinked, taken aback. I am here, Lorraine continued, to protect the man I raised. And that means asking you a question only you can answer. She paused. A single breath of anticipation rolled across the room. Do you love my son more than you love being admired? The question hit like moral thunder. Victoria staggered back half a step, her breath catching on the edge of panic. Because this wasn't about a wedding. This wasn't about a mistake. This wasn't about social embarrassment but her character. About who she truly was. Everyone waited for her response. When Victoria finally spoke, her voice cracked wide open. No, she whispered. Everyone stiffened. Her voice came again, clearer, trembling but honest. No, not yet. The admission stunned the entire room into a profound, reverent silence. I love him, Victoria continued, pressing a hand against her chest. But not the way I should. Not the way he deserves. I got so caught up in the wedding, in the image, in what my parents expected. I lost sight of what marriage means. Tears rolled freely now, streaking her makeup. I can't pretend to be ready to love him the way he needs, not while I'm still afraid of being anything less than perfect. Michael felt something heavy loosen in his lungs. The truth hurt, but it also freed him from years of quiet, emotional guessing. Lorraine nodded once, slow and measured. Honesty, she said softly, is the first step toward growth. Victoria turned to Michael. I need help learning how to be better, she whispered. And I need to earn your mother's respect, not demand it. Michael took a step closer, pain and love warring in his expression. Victoria, you're not expected to be perfect. Just willing. Willing to see people. Willing to admit when you're wrong. Willing to grow. He looked at Lorraine. She's right, he said quietly. She's not there yet. Lorraine studied him carefully. The man she raised, the man she fought for, the man she sacrificed a lifetime of comfort for. And what do you want, Michael? She asked. It was the first time the question had been directed at him, not at the relationship, not at the bride, not at the reputation of the families in the room. It was simply about him. He inhaled deeply. I want a wife, he said softly, not a performance. Victoria closed her eyes, the words cutting and healing at the same time. And finally, I want a mother who doesn't have to sit in a corner of the room, he finished. Lorraine's eyes shone. The elders murmured, nodding in agreement. Some guests dabbed their eyes. Others, especially the ones who mocked Lorraine earlier, shifted uncomfortably as their own ugliness reflected back at them. At the staff table, Thomas whispered under his breath, "That's a good boy." Lorraine placed a hand on Michael's arm. "My son," she said, "you have your answer. Now choose your path." He looked at Victoria. She looked terrified. Not of losing the wedding, but of losing him. And for the first time, that fear didn't make her defensive, it made her accountable. "I'm willing," she whispered, "if you'll give me the chance. I want to grow. I want to be someone who deserves the life your mother built for you." Her words were sincere, but sincerity was only the beginning. Michael took her hands. "I'm willing to try," he said, "but we're not walking into that marriage tomorrow pretending tonight didn't happen. We're postponing the wedding." The guests gasped. Victoria's knees buckled, but Michael steadied her. "Not ending," he said softly. "Postponing. For us to build something real." A fragile, hopeful relief flooded her eyes. Lorraine nodded, approving of the decision. "Marriage," she said, "is not built in a ballroom. It's built in truth." Her gaze swept the room. Every guest, every staff member, every person who witnessed the night unfold. "And tonight," she said softly, "we started telling the truth." Slowly, something beautiful happened. Guests who had laughed at Lorraine stepped forward, shy, awkward, remorseful. "I'm sorry," one said. "I was wrong," said another. "You deserved better," a third whispered. And each time, Lorraine's answer was the same. "Use tonight to learn. Don't let the lesson go to waste." Victoria approached last. Her voice trembled. "Mrs. Washington, I don't expect forgiveness yet, but I promise you, one day I will earn it." Lorraine touched her cheek gently. "Forgiveness," she said, "is not earned. It's chosen. And I choose it, because my son loves you, and because grace grows in the spaces where we tell the truth." Victoria cried openly, clutching Lorraine's hands. It was not a reconciliation of perfection. It was a reconciliation of effort. And effort is where real marriages begin. By the time guests left the ballroom, people whispered not about scandal, but about transformation. One woman told her husband, "I hope I would have apologized too." Another murmured, "We judged too quickly." A man whispered, "This is the kind of story that changes families." Lorraine walked out with Michael on one side, and an unsteady, humbled Victoria on the other. 3 silhouettes. A new beginning. Not perfect, but real. As the doors swung shut behind them, the ballroom felt different. Lighter, more honest. And those who witnessed the events of that night left with a truth they would never forget. Power is not found in wealth. Power is found in character. Respect is not owed. It is shown. Family is not always blood. It is love, chosen, honored, protected. And most of all, grace is the strongest form of power there is. If you were in Michael's shoes, would you have postponed the wedding too? Do you think Victoria deserves a second chance? And what does real love require from us? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might change someone's life. Do not forget to like this story if it moved you. Subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories every week. And remember, sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who change everything.